Hey, I'm Jim Dewey, and this is Combating the Narrative. So this is part 2 of my series on Mr. Beat's immigration video. If you missed the first part, check it out. If not, here we go.
Immigrants today also speak English at a greater rate than immigrants 100 years ago. 84% of recent immigrants speak English, compared with only about half who came through during the late 1800s.
This video is already getting rather long, so I'm not going to do a deep dive into those numbers there. But suffice to say, first and foremost, in the age of mass communication, and the fact that the United States and a couple of other English-speaking countries happen to be the current cultural hegemons, it's a lot easier to learn English than it was in the 1800s, broadly speaking. Furthermore, this statistic doesn't make a whole lot of sense without information on what constitutes English speaking. Is it fluent with no accent? Is it conversational? Is it knows a few words? Like, there are degrees to language proficiency. Even still, that's not like a good argument in favor of immigration. That's still a very high percentage that does not speak the de facto national language. That's concerning. And anecdotally, I can tell you even here in the Midwest, in areas which are traditionally very white, you're now starting to see advertisements and radio programs exclusively, not in English, but in Spanish.
America grants permanent residence to 1 million people every single year.
1 million sounds like a lot, but remember, America's population is over 330 million.
Okay, firstly, you need to take into consideration that that's just granting of permanent residence. That's not counting all the people who weren't granted permanent residence, have children, who then become citizens, by virtue of the fact that the Supreme Court willfully misinterpreted the birthright citizenship clause, which reads, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. I'm going to place emphasis on the phrase, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, meaning foreign citizens or subjects were intentionally excluded. That clause was intended to grant citizenship to freed slaves after the Civil War. In the debates that took place in Congress over the ratification of the 14th Amendment, and this clause in particular, there was some question brought up as to whether or not this would confer citizenship to members of the Indian tribes. The response from the bill's authors was certainly not. And if they were unwilling to grant citizenship to people who are already within the territory, members of Indian tribes, you would be insane to try and claim that the original intent of the 14th Amendment was to confer citizenship to anyone who was born here, regardless of the citizenship status of their parent. That the authors of the 14th Amendment wanted to grant citizenship to those whose only tie to the nation was that they happened to be born within the sovereign borders of the United States. And again, there's not an even population distribution of these migrants throughout the United States. The border states have been hit so hard, and they had comparatively smaller populations to begin with. Go travel to the Southwest and try and tell me that mass immigration has not had any effect, and that, 1 million a year isn't a lot. And it completely glosses over the long-term ramifications on demographics and politics in this nation of the naturalized citizens, the permanent residents children will have. And make no mistake, voting patterns are strongly correlated with racial and ethnic backgrounds. And again, looking at U.S. Census data, the non-Hispanic white population in the 1960 census, just before the 1965 Immigration Act, which threw open the doors of this country, was 85.4%. The 2020 census indicated that non-Hispanic whites accounted for 57.8% of the U.S. population. That is dramatic. What's even more dramatic is that population is expected to fall below 50% by 2045. Non-Hispanic whites, being the founding stock of this country, do not try and tell me that the effects of our current immigration policy are negligible.
86% of Americans were born in the United States, and 3.8 million Americans are born there each year.
Americans by citizenship status, maybe, not Americans by blood and culture and history.
Family-based immigration is part of its current immigration system and is aimed to help immigrant families immigrate together, because maintaining a family unit is better for both the immigrants and society at large.
Citation needed. What's better for society at large is not having any of those immigrants here. What's better for society at large is not allowing immigrants to bring more immigrants over by virtue of the fact that they themselves were allowed to immigrate here. That doesn't make any sense.
However, this system is often attacked by anti-immigrant groups.
I identify as pro-American, not anti-immigrant. Also, gee, I wonder why they would attack that system.
Chain migration allows immigrants to sponsor not only their immediate family, parents, spouses, and children under age 21, but much of their extended family once they gain citizenship. Unmarried adult children, and any children they might have. Married adult children, and their children. And brothers and sisters, and their children. Princeton University researchers, using the most recently available data, found that immigrants sponsored an average of 3.45 additional relatives each.
Grab your blanket because it's about to get scary. Okay, first of all, most immigrants don't sponsor a relative. The research she is referencing is from a study called Family Sponsorship and Late Age Immigration in Aging America. In it, the authors estimate that each, quote, initiating immigrant eventually sponsors 3.45 immigrants on average. But what is an, quote, initiating immigrant? The first person in a family unit to come to the United States. So that 3.45 number comes from the entire chain. Say an immigrant worker sponsors their spouse. Well, their spouse could sponsor their mother, who could then sponsor her brother. The mother and her brother both count as part of the original employment immigrants chain. And so the mother is not creating a new chain, so that 3.45 number isn't so crazy now, is it?
Yeah, the PragerU graphic might be a bit disingenuous, but that's sort of besides the point. And that's precisely what I took their script to mean. Yeah, for each initiating immigrant, there's an average of 3.54 immigrants. That is a tremendous amount. So, on average, every immigrant we allow in results in a total of 3.54 immigrants. That's huge. That's a 354% increase. Again, not taking into account that immigrants tend to have more children than native-born residents.
PragerU is actually showing a family tree where one person is apparently sponsoring 18 people, which again is over 5 times the average number. It's also not a simple process to sponsor a loved one. If you want to help your family member immigrate to the United States, you have to pay a $535 filing fee and provide proof that you can financially support both yourself and your relative without government assistance. Once your relative gets to the United States, you are legally responsible for supporting them. And if you don't, the government will fine you. In the current immigration system, folks hoping to come to the United States must go through an intensive vetting process.
Yeah, the intensive vetting process of either overstaying a visa or swimming across the Rio Grande and then having children.
Which includes multiple background checks, medical examinations, and in-person interviews with American immigration officials. The review process lasts an average of almost 10 months. But many immigrants have to wait much longer before coming to the United States. Let's go back to the earlier example with the spouse sponsoring their mother, who then sponsors her brother. The spouse would have to become a naturalized citizen first, which takes a minimum of 5 years. It would then take at least a year for the mother to get her green card, and then she would have to wait another 5 years to be naturalized so she could apply to sponsor her brother. Then they would wait for at least 13 years or longer for a green card for her brother. So basically, the brother wouldn't be able to become a U.S. citizen for at least 24 years after the spouse first came to the country.
Number one, 24 years is not a very long time. in the historical sphere, like serious historians, they tend to, look at things from 30,000 feet, not, a fraction of the span of a human lifetime. Furthermore, this is only accounting for the legal process for obtaining permanent residency or citizenship. This is not accounting for people who are just here by virtue of the fact that they've overstayed visas or hopped the border or what have you, and the people who are here without their citizenship because we allowed them to have children here and then their children became citizens and now we can't deport them because their child is a citizen somehow.
So the 1 million immigrants granted permanent residence each year potentially adds over time another 3.5 million.
No, you don't get to count those immigrants twice. It's still just 1 million a year. They're counted the same. It's not an additional number.
I will grant that PragerU probably should have done their math a little better here. But I mean, it still is a net total for 1 year of immigration over time. A total, grand total, including that 1 million, 3.5 million people, which again is a measurable percentage of the current U.S. population.
In addition, an estimated 100,000 refugees and asylum seekers, people who claim to be fleeing political or personal strife abroad, enter the country annually.
No, again, you don't get to count those immigrants thrice. They are still part of that original 1 million a year statistic. And refugees also go through a very rigorous vetting process.
Again, PragerU needs to do their math a little better, though I don't think it's on purpose. I think they're genuinely stupid. But flying over here on a visa, overstaying that visa, applying for asylum status, and then intentionally missing your court date is not a thorough vetting process.
In that same time frame, nearly 500,000 more people came to America through the diversity visa lottery.
There you go again. No, you don't get to count those immigrants quadrice. Wait, I don't think that's a word yet. But yeah, it's still just 1 million a year. Oh, and plus, the number she actually gives is for 10 years. The U.S. grants only around 50,000 diversity visas each year, and again, that's part of the original 1 million number.
Again, I think we're getting hung up in the nitty-gritty details of PragerU stupidity, and I'm not here necessarily to defend PragerU so much as I'm here to defend their position from Mr. Beat's stupidity. And you can try and downplay the numbers all you'd like. I mean, with the million or so legal immigrants or people becoming permanent residents or whatever their exact legal status is, resulting in an additional 2.54 million people who otherwise would not have been in this country, and then them staying here and having a bunch of children and a bunch of illegals coming over is not something a rational person can downplay, and the proof is in the pudding. Just look at U.S. Census data between 1960 and 2020, along with current population predictions projected out to 2045 and 2065. We have been replaced in this country. You can call it the Great Replacement, white supremacist theory, if you're against it. Otherwise, it's stunning and brave and a good thing if you're for it, but it's something that is actively happening, has actively happened, and you can't deny it. But yeah, trying to make these a little more digestible, so we'll pause it here. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for part 3.